Dan Heng, let's talk about him. Let's talk about the value of his Eidolon 2, his Eidolon 1, and his signature light cone in comparison to somebody like Seele with her signature and Eidolon 2. I'm going to also talk about the value of Eidolon 2s as a whole, when you should go for them, and when they're worthwhile to consider. Dan Heng's, overall, it's decent. His Eidolon 2 is great. His Eidolon 1 is it's a decent damage bonus. It's not anything I'd write home about. I think his light cone is better value than his Eidolon 1, but that's obvious. And you all aren't here for Eidolon 1. What most people consider is Eidolon 2, that immediate advance action forward, and it does help out a lot, especially when you consider that stack he gains essentially forbids him from using his skill points. He uses up all 3 stacks immediately thereafter, so it means you don't have to consider skill point management as heavily. Now, in terms of him as a character, and in terms of comparing the value of his Eidolons and signature versus somebody like Seele, I would say that in all honesty, his light cone is better than hers. Specifically because hers has the prerequisite in that you need about 160 speeds to get the maximum value out of this one. And that's achievable very easily with her E2. But if you're going at E0 and you have 160 speed, you don't need more speed. So it kind of ends up running into a situation where her Eidolon 2 loses value the more speed substats you have, because it gives her an extra 25% speed. Her Eidolon 1 is additional crit rate in comparison to Dan Heng's Eidolon 1, which is just a damage bonus, Righteous Heart. For those of you who don't know, Righteous Heart is just the damage bonus here. It's not the crit or anything else like that. This is the crit damage. Righteous Heart is just a damage percent bonus, which isn't as valuable as crit. So theoretically, Seele's Eidolon 1 is more valuable, which is nice because the consistency is a decent bonus, but he has so much crit stacked into his kit that it's kind of a no points. Is it worth going for? I played him at E0 S1, I played him at E2 S1, and overall I think that E2 has a decent amount of value to it. I think that it's really good in certain situations. In most situations it allows him to be a much more skill point positive character, because I mean he's still using them, but he's not using them nearly as much because of those additional stacks. He's dealing a bit more damage too, especially per rotation, especially if you have him, like I do, as a slow oriented build. In those instances with E2, Wukong is his best buffer, because in that particular team comp, Wukong is adding additional crit rate and crit damage to his ults, which is, I'd say I consider it a decent bonus, but the problem here is that 27% crit and 61% crit damage. The 61% crit damage is a bit of a no point because he buffs himself so heavily with that crit damage, but either way, it's still nice to have. I think that he falls into a vaguely similar loop of Seele in that they both use a lot of skill points. I'd say that Seele's a bit less draining and taxing on your overall team because you can't run her with somebody like Silverwolf and then somebody else like Pela or a debuffer or whatever. Whereas with Dan Heng, your teammates using skill points does bite into his damage quite a fair bit, to an extent to where I would say that E2 alleviates that a lot, especially once you have his signature, but it is a bit of an inflexible team comp. Now, he works great with Luocha, and he works great with Silverwolf, especially when you consider the fact that he wants imaginary weakness, and she can implant that if she has more imaginary characters on the team. But in that sense, is it worth going for, and do I recommend it? I'd say if you like this character, you're obviously going to get any Eidolon you can on him. I think they're all decent propositions, but I'd say E1, it's meh. It's a decent damage bonus. It's not that good, but it's 13% additional damage. If you want that, go ahead. E2 is the main hitter. E3 is additional damage on his basic attack because that's all he does. It's a decent pick. E4, I don't think it's really worthwhile. I'm not gonna lie, it's a damage bonus because he does allow him to keep his buff up. But for the vast majority of you, you're gonna be using basic attack into ult, into basic attack next turn, and then ult again. So this doesn't necessarily apply too heavily unless it's that basic ult, basic rotation. E6 is the biggest damage one, but let's be honest here, if you're considering E6, you are going to get all these on the way here, and he's going to be a great character. I would say though that a much easier rotation would be if you have this up. Signature refinements on this does double essentially the energy regen rate from 6% to 12%, which is 24% in total. Because it's 2 stacks. I'd say that's wonderful because that's the equivalent to an energy regen rope. That's not an energy regen rope. Where is it? Here. That's a little bit more than energy regen rope. So in that, if you wanted to simulate how an S5 would feel, just slide an energy regen rope onto this character, and you'll see a pretty nice difference, especially in tandem with his signature. But either way, does he hold up in comparison to somebody like Seele, and is he a better DPS? I think that if you're on the fence about who's stronger and who's more valuable for your teams, please consider this. Both of them have their own uses. Yes, he's good in AoE, and I understand that's the main argument a lot of people have for him. And yes, he's good in single target, but so is she. She also is less skill point hungry. Don't get me wrong, she uses a lot of them, but you also have the advantage of just being able to say, once you have Resurgence, do a basic attack. And then your next character has that one skill point, and if your next character is a healer, well, you can now heal your party. He doesn't have that luxury. You have the option of either doing one basic attack, a double stacked, or a triple stacked, and you can exactly reduce the stacks, so good luck with that. Now, either way, both of these characters have the pros and cons. I don't think he's absolutely a character who's going to shatter your expectations, because I do believe Seele has a bit more flexibility. I think that the speed allows her more actions per turn, and I think if you're talking about per rotation, both of them are relatively similar in the amount of damage you're doing overall. It's just that Seele is playing less by your opponent's rules. If he gets debuffed, slowed, frozen, imprisoned, outraged, that is basically your entire team's damage gone out the window. If he takes a lot of damage, because he is going to be targeted quite a lot, because unlike other destruction units like Blade, like Arlen, like Clara, he doesn't have the high defense and high HP, so he's not necessarily as tanky as them, and that's kind of a downside, because this unit will be attacked as though he's an agility or as though he's an abundance or preservation unit, and that's a big issue for somebody like him. It means you do need to kind of keep him alive. And don't get me wrong, that's nice if you have Luocha, but if you don't, if you're a individual who doesn't necessarily have that character, then you're kind of in a bad spot. Is this saying he's a bad unit? No, absolutely not. Is this saying his E2 is necessary? No, it just makes things a little bit easier for you in terms of the damage department. I would say though, in terms of flexibility, your Blade is going to have a little bit more in terms of where he can just kind of slide into without necessarily messing up things as much. Once again, Blade uses one skill point every 3 turns. Seele uses, I'd say, 1 to about 4 or 3, depending on how many resurgence procs you get and if you use a burst after. Heng uses 3 immediately, which averages out, I think, into a similar amount of damage. It's just how you want to use them. I think they're both really good characters. I think that if you're going for Eidolons and you already have one of them, you need 2 teams. If you have your secondary DPS and you like them, that's by all means wonderful. I still need to get his new Lycone up. I don't think one like Heng is absolutely going to shatter the expectations for Seele. I've used both. Seele is my main farming unit now. He's just my going into Swarm because the boss is weak to Imaginary, and I kind of want to do this AoE because all the 72 other bosses it summons are also weak to Imaginary, and it's just easier that way. But Seele, in my opinion, hasn't fallen off. She's not bad now. Regardless, whose E2 is actually better? Because we did kind of go on a side tangent here. His is an ult and action forward. Cool beans. It's dependent on him getting his ult. Hers is 25 more speed, about 25% overall. And it's nice. It's more actions per turn, and it makes building her out because you can now throw on some attack boots onto her, but it's just speed. Speed, don't get me wrong, goes into her light cone, but without that light cone, you're just getting a speed bonus. And that's nice. It's more actions per turn, which is more damage, but it's nowhere near going to be as valuable as something like this. And this, technically speaking, isn't even more damage, just more actions. Both of their Eidolons essentially do the exact same thing. Hers just in the form of speed for her kit, his just in the form of action forward, which can legitimately be stopped by your opponent, especially if they're a boss, going into a second phase. If your boss goes into a second phase, you don't get that immediate action forward. The boss moves first, and then you. So in a lot of situations, it's best to just do the basic attack to defeat the enemy, save your ult up so you can start that rotation out again with that action forward. Otherwise, this is just wasted. There are certain scenarios in which this is actually a downside. Not necessarily a downside, but not as valuable as it otherwise should be. Like when you have your ult up and it's your turn. If you use your ult first, he won't get that turn. He won't get that action forward. Instead, you're incentivized to use his auto attack even if your ult meter is already up, just so that way once you use his ult, you get that action forward again. It doesn't just stack 2 turns next. So please keep that in mind. Either way though, I think they're both great characters. Just go for who you prefer. I'm going to slide in a Fushuan and a Lynx onto this team with E2 Seele, E6 Silverwolf. I'm probably going to grab E1 or E2 Fushuan. I'll see how the pulls go. And I'll see how that mono quantum team performs. I'll compare that to this man's team, because if he's the king of DPS now, arguably, with that mono elemental team, I do want to see how he performs in general in comparison to her. But that's just my opinion. Tell me yours down below. Are you going for E1, E2, E3? Are you E6ing this man? If you are, good luck to you. I hope you win every 50-50. But This imaginary resistance penetration is nice. I'd say if you're going for something like that, slide in a Silver Wolf into that team too, just to ensure they have imaginary weakness. And then the 20% to 60% damage increase is wonderful. But that's my thoughts on Imbibitor Lunae, his E2 in comparison to E6 or E2 Seele, and overall, just which one's better. I think they're relatively equal. I just think it's just which wording you prefer. They legitimately basically do the same thing. An action 4 is just immediately there, whereas a consistent 25 to 50 speed is always going to be a bonus for her. And considering she'll be at 180 speed overall, it's not too much to complain about. Both of them are great characters. He's just more AoE focused. She's single target, but does have the potential to really help out her team. If you're looking at more Eidolons, all these Eidolons for her are great. Additional damage means more ult spam. Ult spam that has a bit more of a group effect rather than just single target effects is nice. This is just buffing more damage for longer consistent damage and then more damage. But overall, all of them are wonderful. Either way, that's my thoughts. I recommend you pull him if you like him, skip him if you don't, wait for Fushuan, wait for Lynx especially if you don't have another healer, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.